Welcome to Pachehra Talks channel. Hello everyone. Today we are going to secure Azure AVD session host. Yes, there are some best practices that we're going to talk about, and this is the architecture, a high level architecture that we have been using to learn Azure AVD networking and other aspects. So this is the client who is trying to access the session host, the pooled one, through the control plane because it is a PaaS service, right? So keep this architecture in mind. Uh, and today we are going to secure. In the previous video, we talked about the best practices to secure the entire AVD. But today we are talking specifically session host, right? In the previous video, we secure almost all the layers. We did talk about the zero trust principles while securing Azure AVD. But today it's about session host. So the very first thing is what is there in this VM? The very first thing is we have data, right? So let's protect the data. A lot of things may be overlapping with the previous video, but don't worry. Here, there are certain other aspects of it that we are talking. Even if it is overlapping, it is okay. Just the you're refreshing your knowledge. All right, so the very first thing is data, and of course we use AVD. If you remember why we use AVD video, we talked about one of the reason was compliance and the security. So we may have a sensitive data, right? So we need to prevent users from copying data or capturing screens within the session host. So what we are doing, the very first thing is we are protecting our sensitive data from being exfiltrated, right? And how it is getting exfiltrated through maybe clipboard operations or screen captures, right? So that's what we need to do. But how can we do that? That's the question. We have to implement. We have to implement what? We have to implement uh, clipboard redirection disable, right? That's what we need to implement. We need to disable the clipboard redirection. We could use group policies for the AVD session host settings to disable clipboard redirections, and there are certain settings on the RDP configuration. So the point is we need to disable clipboard redirection. Okay, this will help us to prevent data exfiltration, because assumption is not even assumption, the data that we have, this is the organizational data, this is the sensitive data, and we can save it by disabling clipboard redirection or by preventing screen capture by this setting. We can do that for the AVD session host. So we can implement through group policies or through RDP configurations. Anyways, the point is this is the not the implementation session, but the security, how we can secure it. First, the data on the session host, the data which is there on the Azure, because they are the disk attached, there is a storage account for the logics, we are encrypting and doing all that thing that we have discussed in the previous video. Now here in particular, with respect to this client who is accessing the session host, all the data we have here, we want it not to be exfiltrated. So we are going to disable the clipboard redirection, we are going to prevent the screen capture, and this will mitigate risk of data leakage and unauthorized data sharing. So we can write here as well. So this will help us mitigate the risk of data leakage and unauthorized data sharing, ultimately data exfiltration. So This thing is something very interesting from the security perspective that we can easily achieve for our data. Let me put it there in a box. Okay, and this is for our data. This is the first part of it. Now, second thing, what is there? If you think this is the data which is there on the session node, what could be the other thing that we should be thinking or worried or protecting? Well, the second thing I would say, these are endpoints, right? So we need to have some kind of antivirus kind of thing, right, to protect it. So it is AVD and Azure and Microsoft. So of course, we have something which is called Microsoft Defender for Endpoint. We can activate that or enable that on all session host. So I would say enable MS Defender for endpoints on all session host. And what will this give us? This will uh, help us to provide advanced threat protection, real-time monitoring, and automated response to security incidents, right? And it will help us to protect against malware, ransomware, and other endpoint threats. So, how can we protect the endpoint when we think it as an endpoint? Because it is an endpoint, don't think it. I'm just saying from the perspective of security. Data is there, it's running on a VM. For VM, we need some kind of antivirus thing. So that is Microsoft Defender for Endpoint, and it will provide what ATP, Advanced Threat Protection, real-time monitoring, and we can have automated response as well configured to security threats, right? And how it will help us to protect? It will protect against malware, ransomware, and other endpoint threats. So these things it will help us. Endpoint. So this is about our endpoints. So we got data, and now we have endpoint. What could be the third point that we should be thinking from the security perspective? This is for the endpoint. Oh, maybe we can do that later while summarizing, hooking it up, right? Good. So the third point is, because these are the endpoints, that's why we have Microsoft Defender for Endpoint. Now we can think of second Tuesday. Remember patching. So patch management. We have to think for the patch management. We want to patch all those vulnerabilities that come across and all those patches that releases on second Tuesday. So we should be regularly applying security patches and updates to session host. So, and we could simply say through Azure Update Management, or there are different ways to patch the AVD sessions, maybe utilizing the new images, updated images, or by simply patching any other virtual machine. Schedule regular reviews of update compliance and address any pending updates promptly. You can also utilize Azure policies for those machines which are not up to the compliance level or the patch level. And this will reduce the risk of exploitation through unpatched vulnerabilities, right? So we should have points, we should make some points here. Uh, Regularly update patches, right? And we can simply use Azure Update Management or any other or updated images, right? Or we should have Azure policies maybe pointing towards the non-compliant virtual machines. And what it will do, it will help us reduce the risk of exploitation through the unpatched vulnerabilities, right? This is what we will get if we keep on patching our session host. Because if you see, these are just the virtual machines, and we should have all those security best practices implemented that we apply to any other virtual machine, right? So we are done with these 3 points. Now we are patching every second Tuesday, but we should also do regular vulnerability assessment, right? We should not just wait for the second Tuesday and the patches which are getting released. We should definitely go ahead and perform regular vulnerability assessment on session host. And this will help us identify weaknesses that need to be addressed or prevent potential attacks. Identifies weaknesses that needs to be patched, right? And how can we do that? We can do that with the help of MS Defender for Cloud. They have this vulnerability assessment through, I guess, through Qualys. They utilize Qualys to perform that thing, and it will help us detect and mitigate security vulnerabilities before they can be exploited. All right, so vulnerability assessment we should have in place. This is our fourth point. Now, fifth point, I just wanted to highlight because even in the session host, uh, we talked about the all those things. If I still have that, yeah, we talked about all those all layered we did in the previous video. Here we talked about IAM, but similarly, I just wanted to refresh. Even for the session host, we should implement RBAC to limit access to session host based on user roles. So this is the fifth point. RBAC. IAM is something is very crucial when we talk about security, right? So we need to ensure that users only have the permission necessary to perform their job functions, including the attack surface area. Least access principle we should follow. Least privileged principle. And Azure AD or MS Entra ID will help us performing that, implement that. And we should also have regular access reviews so that we know the person who has the access should have the access, a person who should not have the access are still having the access, right? So this will minimize the risk of unauthorized access or insider threats. So unauthorized access and insider threats, right? And we can utilize simply MS Entra ID to perform this, implement this, and we should have access reviews in place so that we can keep the eye on the access, right? This is the fifth point for the session host. Now let's talk about something which is really interesting. In case uh, for session host, but this guy is accessing this session host, and suppose this guy just accessed and forgot about it and went for a coffee and tea, then what can we do? We can have features like ideal session timeout, or we can say screen lock, right? These things you find in our organization all the time on your desktop when you are in the organization, so that it keeps your computer protected and from shoulder surfing. If you're not available on on your workstation, nobody can see, or any data leakage, things like that, right? So we should configure idle session timeouts and enforce screen lock policies, which will prevent unauthorized access, right? Unauthorized access to unattended sessions and reduce the risk of data exposure. And reduce data exposure, right? And we can implement with the help of group policies or Azure AD conditional access, implement conditional access policies to enforce session controls. So this will protect against unauthorized access to unattended sessions. So we should implement point number 6 for for the situations where client is using working and just leaving the session and going for a loo, maybe a coffee, or maybe stuck on a phone, right? So idle session timeout. What else we can do? Actually, what these clients are accessing here on the session node, they're accessing applications, right? So if this idle session is there, what is accessible, or what is exposing? Eventually data, but through applications, right? Applications. Right. So what we can do for applications from the broader perspective, we should have app locker and Windows Defender application control. Right. What it will do? Well, it will prevent unauthorized and malicious applications from executed. It will only allow the application is supposed to run on the session host. It will control, not any other application. For example, the session host remain idle and somebody else try to access or run any other application which are not supposed to run here. So this application control can prevent it. It will prevent unauthorized and malicious application from being executed and reduce the risk of executing malicious software. So application control or app locker will help here. This is our sixth or seventh security best practices for the session host. Then finally, we all know the things like backup and recovery, right? I should write here. Backup and recovery in case something happens, it will help us. BCDR. And something which is very important is monitoring and logging. We should have these in place all the time. Monitoring and logging is something which will enable you early detection and response to potential security incident. It will give you the visibility in your environment, what is happening, how it is happening, and how should not it should be happening, right? So logging and monitoring of user activities on session host. All right, so let's summarize this. We talked about 9 best practices. Data, for this box where we are saving data from data leakage and unauthorized data sharing through disabling clipboard redirection and preventing screen capture. These are VMs, so we are considering endpoints and enabling Microsoft Defender for Endpoint, which will provide advanced threat protection, real-time monitoring, and automated response for security threats. It will help us through malware, ransomware, and other endpoints, right? And then we have third point that we talked about patch management, because as I said in the previous point, it's just a VM, so we have to treat it as a VM and implement all those best practices like regularly update the patches. The fourth point was vulnerability assessment, because we cannot rely on the patch management only. We should proactively go ahead and check if there are any vulnerabilities and fix it. Then we should always have RBAC in place, which is most important security aspect of anything nowadays, especially when you are in cloud. Then we talked about idle session timeout and screen log, because if client is working on the sessions and leaving it for XYZ urgency, then this will help you. And app control will again help you, because it will not allow to execute any other application. And if something happens, you should have your backup plan in place. And visibility and insights, what is happening, monitoring and logging will help you. Even this monitoring and logging of user activities will help you if something happened to protect it. It should not go further, right? So, with that, I think we are done with the session host security. Well, thank you for watching, and you guys have a wonderful day. Bye bye.